Today I will be presenting my research on harnessing convolutional neural networks for valley fever mitigation in the Southwest United States. Before we dive into my research, some context about valley fever is required. So pictured behind me is Devin Buckley, an 18-year-old college student who was enrolled in the University of Arizona in 2018. Now one day while he was walking to class, he felt pain in his chest along with numbness in his limbs. When he went to the doctors on campus, they didn't know what was wrong with him. They had conducted various tests, but they all came back negative. He eventually went back to his hometown in Chicago over summer, and he was there checked into the ICU. He was finally tested for valley fever there, and his results came back as positive. In the years following Buckley's diagnosis, the disease spread from his lungs to his spine, even getting to his legs. And at the height of his illness, he had to spend 2 weeks on a ventilator, which was single-handedly keeping him alive at the time. Buckley was eventually able to make a full recovery, but still continues to go to the hospital a few times every week for checkups. Now it's important to note that this story, I tell you, isn't meant to scare anyone about valley fever or its implications. Rather, it's to say that valley fever is misrepresented and in many cases diagnosed very late. It's seen perfectly in the case of Devin Buckley. Now that some urgency about valley fever and its implications have been mentioned, this leads me to my research question that I explored, which is, can convolutional neural networks, when coupled with environmental health data, significantly enhance our ability to predict and mitigate valley fever outbreaks? And to that, you might be asking yourself, what exactly is valley fever? Valley fever is an infection caused by breathing in the spores of the fungus Coccidioides. The spores can survive through heat, drought, lingering in the soil. Additionally, when dirt is disturbed, whether it be through construction, wind, or even walking, these spores can be lofted into the air, which are then inhaled by humans or even animals, most commonly dogs. It should also be noted that 97% of all U.S. cases of valley fever are reported in Arizona and California, according to the California Department of Public Health. Symptoms of valley fever include coughing, fevers, shortness of breath, etc., all of which are fairly common with other respiratory issues. Hence, another reason why its diagnosis is delayed a lot of the time. Now, this leads perfectly into one of the many issues at hand, which is the delay of diagnosis. Hu et al. Conducted a study and found that there was a median delay of 27 days when coming to diagnosing patients with valley fever. And this delay led to a financial medical cost of roughly $47,000. Additional issues include how the fungus survives. Dovos and his colleagues found that cocci grow and flourish in warm and dry conditions, hence why the infection is so widespread in the Southwest, like in Arizona and California. The images behind me are maps of the United States, with the top image being a predictive model of the infection as time goes on, and the bottom image being the current distribution of the infection. Additionally, lots of former research regarding the use of convolutional neural networks for image detection have already been conducted, and most analogous to my research is Xie et al.'s research, in which they achieved a 90% accuracy of detecting dust storms in Eastern Asia. Their convolutional neural network hierarchy can be seen pictured on the right of the screen. Additionally, researchers Yaro Hamadi et al. And Li et al. Too utilize convolutional neural networks to predict and forecast dust storms, respectively. With that being said, there still comes a gap in all of this research when compared to mine. And that is, no former researchers linked their convolutional neural network models to any forms of health illnesses like I am doing with valley fever. Now, taking a different approach to the articles mentioned earlier was researchers Ortiz et al., who used a convolutional neural network to create an early warning system for health-related issues. Now, this differs from my research at hand, since Ortiz didn't rely on satellite technology, and him and his researchers didn't correlate those results with any infections. To understand the convolutional neural network, which is the method that I use for my research, the overall idea of machine learning must be first understood. And this process can be broken down into some multiple shorter steps pictured in the flowchart behind me. The first step to this process is defining a problem, which means to figure out exactly what you want to predict or classify. The next step is to collect data, and this data will be used to train your actual model. Next is to process this data, which means cleaning the data, whether it be collecting the actual images or making sure that the image format is good enough for you to input it into the model. Next is to choose the model type. There's a variety of machine learning models, such as neural networks, random forests, and in my case, I chose the neural network model. Next is to train and evaluate the models, which just means to program the actual model based on your data, as well as to run it and pretty much just test and see how the model performed using your test data. And after you evaluate the model, you can tune parameters based on how the model results were, and then finally you can just report your findings through either research articles or presentations and get this information out. Now this slide is more specific to the method that I used for my research, which is a convolutional neural network, which is a deep learning architecture commonly used for image analysis. And in my case, I used it to predict if satellite images contained high cases of valley fever or not during certain months of certain years. The first step to this process is the convolutional layers. The convolutional layers apply filters to the image to create feature maps, which are essentially certain characteristics of images, such as looking at the edges, the shapes, or certain textures of the image. Next is ReLU activation. Now each convolutional layer is followed by a ReLU activation function, and ReLU just stands for rectified linear unit. Now what ReLU does is that it introduces nonlinearity, which means that it turns complex images into very simplified images with simplified data that the model can read. Next is the max pooling. Now after the convolutional layer and the ReLU are applied, max pooling layers reduce the dimensionality of the feature maps. This, like ReLU, help decrease the computational load and prevent overfitting of the model by extracting certain features of the images. The second to last step is flattening. Here the feature maps are flattened into a single vector, which are then transformed into the fully connected layers. And then finally, the fully connected layers, the model will output a numerical value, and based on the threshold of that value, it can either determine if valley fever is present or if valley fever is not present. Now, on top of using this convolutional neural network model for predicting whether valley fever is present or not, I ran a correlation analysis afterwards. And this analysis compared my model's output with actual health data from the CDC. Now, a correlation test specifically was chosen to validate the model's accuracy because of a large range of reasons. However, most importantly was because researcher Hung et al. Stated that correlation takes into account the full range of scores, but as a statistical tool, it is not very sensitive to scores on very high or very low ends of our X value, hence why Premier in machine learning research. And behind me is a picture of the infectious disease pages on the CDC's website, which I used to calculate the actual confirmed cases of valley fever for my correlation model. Now looking at the results. At first, and as expected, the model showed poor accuracy with an overall 18% success rate. However, as each run continued on, the model kept learning and kept improving on itself. And by the 15th run, the model showed to reach an accuracy of a 100% rate, which it then flatlined until the 30th run. With that being said, as the model got better over time, the accuracy rate continued at a 100%, and the net loss rate continued at 0%. And when looking at the image behind me, you can see as the blue line increases positively, that's the accuracy rate, while the yellow line decreases. Now, when looking at a model, when I'm looking at a machine learning model, there's usually 4 industry standards that can be run on the model, and that is precision, recall, accuracy, and F1 score tests. And each of these tests give certain insights into aspects of the model as a whole. Now, starting off with the precision of the model, an 85.7% accuracy rate demonstrated that the model was able to classify high dust density versus low dust density when compared to other images. This also means that the false positive and negative rates were extremely minimal. Next, I grouped recall and accuracy together because they are very similar in how they work. And at a rate of 100% and 91.7% respectively, the model showed to be nearly perfect when predicting between high and low dust density. Finally, the F1 score, which is a score using the three derived values as mentioned above, it was then calculated, and my score of 0.7 demonstrated a robust model, and it showed that it was up to convention standards. Another thing to note is that the receiver operating cost graph and the value pictured behind it. And like the other four verifications, an ROC value of 0.76, which is what I received, displays a very successful model. Now, once the model's tests were run, I ran a correlation test on top of that, and the graph on the right was created. Additionally, certain correlation values were calculated from this test. First was the correlation coefficient. My model received a value of 0.786, which demonstrated that there is a positive correlation between my model and the actual reported cases of valley fever from the CDC's website. Additionally, the coefficient of determination. This value of 0.644 indicated that 64.4% of the variability in the reported cases are captured by the model's predictions. These results, along with what was mentioned in the slide before, further add to why this model was indeed very successful in its goal. However, with any research comes its limitations. That being said, three main limitations came up following the study. First, the model's accuracy relies on clear satellite imagery. It's important to note that bad weather or poor image quality could very likely lead to errors in dust level estimation and the prediction of my model. Therefore, improvements could include using better images and adding data like soil conditions to make the model's predictions more accurate. Looking ahead for future research, longer studies to test the model over time, and working with health experts to use the findings in the real world to help prevent actual valley fever would indeed be invaluable. Now to reiterate, the overview of this project was to create a convolutional neural network to look at NASA's EODIS satellite worldview imagery with the intention of being able to detect valley fever patterns in the Southwest. And from the model's prediction, a correlation test was then run to test the validity of the model with actual reported health facts about valley fever from the CDC. That being said, the key findings from this research were as follows. It demonstrated potential of convolutional neural networks in enhancing environmental monitoring for valley fever and other illness prevention. It also provided a more efficient and scalable approach than other traditional methods, as mentioned in my literature review, answering the gap mentioned at the start of my presentation. Thank you.